Hello and welcome back to Elevate Ordinary, a show that's strangely hard to write clickbait titles for, I guess given the theme, for some reason. Today we're talking about rereading books. We'll see you in a moment. Well, welcome back to Elevate Ordinary. I'm your host, JonMarc Grodi.
And I'm Teresa Grodi.
And here we're back with, I guess this is like a second season of Elevate Ordinary here at AWAKEN Catholic. We've got just a new studio. Isn't it beautiful? Yeah, a lot of neat stuff happening here at AWAKEN Catholic. One of the neat things is the new app. If you go check that out at awakenapp.io, theawakenapp.io. You can also download it now from the Apple Store or the Google Play Store, those kinds of places. It's really neat. It's a growing community of people who are passionate about this mission of sharing truth through beauty and being part of these discussions, getting to know the hosts, sharing and helping to promote this mission. It's a pretty neat place, a lot of cool stuff there from the AWAKEN Catholic Ministry. And if you're part of the AWAKEN Nation, which you can join by going to awakencatholic.org/donate, then there's other cool stuff in the app for you too as well. So please do that. If you like this mission, if you're passionate about this work, we'd love to have you as a partner in sharing truth through beauty. And also while you're at it, go to hallow.app/awaken and download the Hallow app. It's a great meditation app. We've been listening to Father Mike Schmitz.
Like everybody else.
Everybody else in the whole world at right now. The Bible in a Year thing, that's on the Hallow app. There's a lot of other neat stuff to help with your prayer life, to help make that more part of your day. And if you download it through hallow.app/awaken, you get a free 30-day premium subscription, which also supports our ministry as well. So I don't think I missed anything there. Yeah. So as I said, we're back with another seemingly really boring sounding topic, but I think it's pretty exciting.
Really sell it, hon.
Well, that's the nature of what we're doing here. I guess as we launch into a second season, that's what we're doing here. That's the whole point that's the theme of our show, right? Yeah. That it's finding the romance in the ordinary thing. It's finding not necessarily the marital sexy romance, but like the romance of life.
Back on topic.
In the ordinary, the ordinary things. You know, it's there. You don't have to go out there to find that adventure, to find that purpose, that meaning that God's called you to. It's there in the ordinary vocation. You just have to find it, look for it. So one of the places you can find it is in a book that you've already read, but probably should read again. That's
right. So Elevate Rereading today.
Yes.
So first of all, before we even get into this, we love books, and you can tell by these these piles of books on the table that we really worked hard to cull down our library of things we were going to bring in the bag to talk to you about today. But would comment below on the app, on Facebook, on YouTube, wherever you're watching this. Let us know what your favorite books are. Which ones have you reread?
Which books are the old friends for you at this point that you go back to, you return to, you visit, spend time with Tammin again? We want to hear about that. This is not a solo cup, by the way. This is a mug. I got to turn it the right way.
Not a red.
Otherwise, it looks like a solo cup.
It's not secret drinking.
You can elevate rereading by having the right solo cup.
Beverage.
In it. Yeah. Anyway, go ahead.
So I came up with this topic because I am not a childhood reader. Okay, so I hated reading. It was like one of my least favorite subjects in school. And then as I got older and I chose, to become a historian, I kind of became a nonfiction snob. I didn't understand why people read fiction when they could just read someone telling them how it was. Like, why would you waste your time in fiction?
You're super utilitarian when it comes to books.
I really was, yeah.
She still married me, though. I mean, so there's something.
It could have turned out differently if I knew you liked fiction.
Yeah, it could have been Providence happened.
All I heard about was The Lord of the Rings.
Yeah.
And I knew that was a movie, so it didn't threaten me. So the very first time that I had not thought about consuming a book as kind of like a checklist, like something to accomplish, like a country to visit, a state to visit, somebody's, some historical figure's grave or battlefield to just check off my list as a place that I had been, as an experience that I had conquered, was after my conversion or reversion to Catholicism. And I was reading a book called Finding Sanctuary by by Abbot Christopher Jameson. He's the abbot of a monastery, a Benedictine monastery in England. And I think that they were kind of big because they had a TV series where they let like everyday businessmen come and like hang out at the monastery and watch the psychosis that ensued, I think. But he quotes this priest, Father Michael Casey, talking about Lectio Divina. Now, Lectio Divina is the church's version of exactly what we're talking about today. So Lectio Divina is a method of reading scripture or spiritual texts. Reading, yeah. So it's a method of reading scripture, which is something obviously that you would reread and reread and reread and never tire of. And God forbid you understood the entire Bible on your first time through as like a 20-year-old or something.
Been there, read that.
I know, right?
I gave it a 3 up on Goodreads.
It's exactly what we're doing with the Father Mike Schmitz Bible in a year, right? So,
the plot.
Okay, so
the plot's
Divina.
iffy. Character development, so. I'm good. Go ahead.
A lot of violence.
Yeah, strangely violent at some times. Yeah, go ahead.
And it's kind of fluffy. No, I'm kidding. I'm just kidding. Oh gosh, that's blasphemy, isn't it?
Well.
Okay. Anyway,
continue on. Press on.
Sorry, we have
Redeem
a topic
yourself.
here. Rereading.
Lectio Divina.
Lectio Divina.
Yeah.
So it's a method of reading a text, rereading the text with yourself in it, or like a particular visualization of what you just read in mind, sitting with the text in kind of like silence or just in front of God, and then seeing what sticks out to you in that text, and then taking that particular, reading it back again with that particular thing that stuck out to you. I mean, different people practice it differently, right. But it's kind of it's a certain kind of reading. So this Australian monk, Father Michael Casey, says of Lectio Divina, Lectio Divina is not only a means of discovering something about God, it also helps us understand our hidden selves. It is not the alienating absorption of a message that is foreign or even hostile to our deepest aspirations. It is the surprising conclusion that our most authentic level of being is mirrored in the scriptures. He says, let the text come to you. And so when I first did dive into fiction, we listened to the audiobook of C.S. Lewis's Space Trilogy.
Did you know that C.S. Lewis has a space trilogy?
It's surprising.
We've told that to some diehard C.S. Lewis fans, and they're like, what? C.S. Lewis wrote a science fiction space
Actually,
trilogy?
a lot of people say they can't get past Paralandra.
Oh, it's so disappointing.
Which is why I think you should, this is us.
You got to reread it.
This is a spoiler.
Yeah,
this is a spoiler from where we're going in this episode, but I think you should treat yourself and get and get the audiobook and have it read to you.
Yes, you're not cheating.
Wait, we'll get to this.
Oh, shoot, spoiler.
We'll get to this. That's okay. So rereading really helped me learn how to stand in awe of a text, stand in awe of the muse of an author, the thing that wasn't mine.
Like the animating soul of a piece of art.
Yeah, rather than to like have the book figured out, which I think that like my education kind of set me up for like analyzing rather than letting the literature work on me.
It makes us very consumerist about the information. Like you get in, you get what you need to get out.
Yeah, I thought people who reread were like lazy, and that's all they did all day was like sit around and like do nothing, or they were just being like lazy about learning other things.
Yeah, you just stay in your own box.
Yeah.
Well, it's a great place to start with that quote from the monk, because go ahead.
I'm going to finish the quote just real quick. Okay. So he says that repetition is the soul of genuine Lexio. It is a right brain activity. We do not grasp the entire content immediately, but in a circular manner. We read and advance, then we go back and we read again. With each repetition, something new may strike us.
Yeah, that's so good. And it's a great place to start, again, with this, because I think when we think of that in the context of Scripture, this makes sense to us. Like, you're not going to presume. That's why we were being so jocular earlier. Why would you presume to know the Bible, to understand it the first time through? No, that's not going to happen. You're expecting, I'm going to have to visit this and revisit this and hear it in different formats, hear it proclaimed to me multiple times, and at different parts of my life, different times, different things are going to pop out to me. God's going to speak to me in different ways. Now, Scripture is literature par excellence. It is the divinely inspired literature, but in an analogous sense, to a lesser degree, but still there, I think all good literature has that quality to it. if it's inspired, if it's good literature, there is this spark of the muse, of this inspiration to it, and it bears some resemblance, analogous resemblance to how we read Scripture, in the sense that exactly what you're talking about there in that quote, that in the rereading the text, a good work of literature, it speaks to us in a certain way. Maybe the first time we read it, we're sort of pursuing the plot, we're rushing along, but if we come back to it, if it's a good work of art, if it's a good book, then there's a part of it that you needed to kind of sit back and let it reach out to you, let it speak into your life. You need to sit with it, rest with it a little bit. And again, that's obviously, we accept that with Scripture, but I guess our argument here is that there are a lot of books out there. Well, maybe not, I don't know, proportionally speaking, in the big scheme of things, I don't know if it's a lot, but there are books that bear that rereading. Yeah,
and as you get older, too, and do a rereading, like say you're reading, our 7-year-old daughter is reading like a Cliff's Notes version, or abridged version, I guess, not Cliff's Notes, of Little Women right now. Yeah. This is like her 3rd chapter book ever. She just started to learn how to read.
Into it. She's giving me daily updates when I come home from work.
Yeah. So she's reading Little Women now, but I know that the book is chunky and big, and I know that the second time that she reads it, or the 3rd time that she reads it when she's an older girl, or a young woman, it's going to take her in different places. Just like now, I really look at Marmee in a completely different way as a mother. She's less foreign to me and more virtuous and incredible. Yeah. And also when I heard of people rereading books, I would think of it in that way, maybe, perhaps. Like I was younger when I read this, and now I'm older, and so it gives me perspective. And again, kind of like a me-based analysis, still like, oh, there's value possibly in rereading later. But what really inspired me for this episode was rereading something immediately after I finished it.
That's just crazy. Yeah, you were telling me about this the other day. Yeah, it kind of blew my mind.
So the first time I read something immediately after was when I had pregnancy insomnia with our 5th, and I was up for like hours at night, and I was going through Jane Austen's. I became a huge fan of Jane Austen, and I was reading her major novels like in a row. And I remember I finished Pride and Prejudice, and I closed it, and it was still the middle of the night, and I was still wide awake, and I was like, I do not have the energy to get out of bed and get another book. And honestly, I don't even want to change to another author. No, I don't even want to change to another universe. I just want to read this again. And I flipped it over, and I started it again immediately after I just finished it. And I couldn't believe the foreshadowing and the character that I was recognizing in the first part of her character descriptions, that I knew intimately the development that was coming because I had just finished it. This was probably maybe the 5th time that I had read Pride and Prejudice. So it wasn't like my first and second time. I knew it very intimately, but it was so fresh in my mind that it was like I was going back for a second date with a person, like a second encounter with a person after I had, I'd just seen them, or coming back to an old friend, like you say. And I was just, my mind was blown. And then I was like, I'm going to do this with all of her novels now. And I kind of like started over again with this course of like all of her novels.
It's like reading the New Testament and Old Testament together. Unless you do them together, you're missing all these interconnections. You're seeing all the prefigurements of Christ. You're seeing all the types, all the forms, all the references. But sometimes you read it too distinctly, and you never can get those connections that are all through there in Scripture, but are also in there in great works of literature. That's what a great book involves. A great story has those connections.
Now I've got a question for you.
Yes.
This is a trick question because I'm going to smash you with my answer.
For me or for them? Okay.
For them.
Okay.
So is listening to the audiobook cheating?
Tell us in the comments.
Right now, live.
Well,
right
now.
So so my answer is absolutely not.
No.
And here's the reason why. Okay. So I'm going to continue with my affinity for Jane Austen.
Go for it.
Okay. So I started out liking her movies only, thinking she was like a Victorian romance novel list, which is just so wrong. And so I started out liking her movies, and then I picked up Pride and Prejudice and read it because I knew it very, very, very well. And I started to read her things of movies that I had watched, and I was like, oh, there's one called Northanger Abbey. Maybe I'll try that book. I'd never heard of it, never read it, and I was like, well, I know Jane Austen well enough. I'm good at reading now. And so I started reading it, and I was just like, I know I'm missing something. Like, these characters just sound so boring and plain, and I know I'm missing something. So I found the movie version of Northanger Abbey, and I watched it, and it's a satire of a Gothic, what's it called? Not romance novel, but a Gothic horror novel. Like popcorn. The Monk or Udolpho. Like very, at the time when people were writing those, are very scandalous, and like you consumed them like novels. And it was an insanely witty satire of it. And so like I opened the book back up again after I'd watched the movie a couple times, and I was just like, oh my gosh, she's brilliant. She's brilliant and witty and ironic. But I would not have gotten that. And I think that that's maybe why so many people don't know that C.S. Lewis has a space trilogy, or honestly don't care about it, because the middle book, Paralandra, is just a ton of chasing and descriptions. Yeah. It's very long with chasing and descriptions. And you do kind of like, I remember reading it for the first time after having listened to the audiobooks maybe 3 times, and reading it for the very first time and just being like, wow, I would not have gotten through this.
Right.
There's no way I would have ever finished that book if I had picked it up.
Yeah.
And now it's like one of the most important books in our marriage. I mean, we named our homeschool after it. Our philosophy and outlook on life, is based on the 3rd book. But we wouldn't have done it if we hadn't have chosen the audiobook.
Right. It's interesting. So one of my favorite books here, How to Read a Book. Sounds pretty compelling, huh? Pretty riveting.
About it.
Yeah, this guy, he's like really, really excited about reading it. It's a great book. It's by Mortimer Adler, who was a philosopher, a 20th century philosopher. And it's actually a surprisingly interesting, fascinating book. And one of the things that the book does is it does actually surprise you with many of the recommendations on how to go about reading that counter maybe your own intuitions. So one of the things, again, that keeps people, I think, getting into reading the first time, let alone rereading, is we come to books oftentimes with these weird compunctions, these weird sense of obligation that if I start a book, well, I have to finish it. And if I'm going to read a book, I need to read it closely. I need to not miss a single thing. He refutes both of those things. I mean, he kind of points out that, not every book is worth reading once, let alone reading twice. And the first time you read through a book, take a fiction book, for instance. The first time you read through a book, you have this temptation, what feels like a temptation, to kind of skim through it and just enjoy the thrill of the plot, and maybe not linger long on, this song or poem or the long descriptions of a scene or scenery or whatever. And he says that, that's okay. The first time you're reading through a book.
Which is absolutely the antithesis of what I learned as literary analysis in school. Like, if you miss something, if you don't understand something, you're just not going to get this book. Right. And so you like nickel and dime every sentence, through everything to go back and reread.
And half the time you just give up. You don't finish it. What he's saying. So there are good books out there. Not every book is worth that close reading or a rereading. And so with that in mind, you should give yourself permission to start books, but not necessarily have to finish them. That's point number 1.
I'm good at that.
Well, I am too, for various reasons. But number 2, like, give yourself permission, whether it's a fiction or a nonfiction book, to start with a light read. If it's a nonfiction book, skip to the end, see where it's going. Look at the table of contents, look at the index, get a sense of the chapter headings, get a sense of where this thing is going, and then, as he recommends, give it a skim. Read through it quickly, because if it's worth reading, if it's really a worthwhile book, it'll be worthwhile reading more closely a second time.
Or perhaps give yourself permission to have the performance of it first.
And that gets us back to that with that in mind, we're talking about great literature especially, that different types of reading, reading it once quickly, reading it a second time maybe more closely, or having it read to you, they're different experiences, and different aspects of them will come out. Actually, listening to a book is the first time is a great way to get into maybe a challenging piece of literature, because you can sit back a little bit and let it be read to you.
Well, and let a person who has put in the time previously, who knows the book, who knows the author, who knows the muse, they love it, and they're reading to you. I'm thinking of Marianne in Sense and Sensibility, who can't stand how dry Edward reads. You know, she needs someone to read and who knows the text and has poured through it a million times. And that's actually like what we have with audiobooks. You don't have to listen to an Edward read you anything.
Right.
You know, it's a great gift that I think we have in audiobooks, but also like in the performance, like when you read Shakespeare, you know, like I remember in high school reading Shakespeare for the first time, and I was like, this is so boring. We read Romeo and Juliet, and I expected it to be this amazing thing. It's Romeo and Juliet, and this is Shakespeare. And I'm reading it, and I'm like, I bite my thumb at you, sir. You bite your thumb at me? Yes, I bite my thumb at you, sir.
What the heck is going on?
And you're just like, this is so stupid. But then you watch like the Claire Danes, Leonardo DiCaprio version, and you're like, oh, he bites his thumb in half. Yeah. You know, you finally get it. You get what he's saying, but you couldn't enter into it because you're so far removed from the time period or from the author or from their struggles or whatever. And you're giving somebody who has a love and who has glimpsed the muse of Shakespeare, who has let that like come into them and then perform it to you. You're allowing them to read it to you, and you're letting it happen to you. One of my favorite books that I don't have here, unfortunately, is called The Awakening of Miss Prim by Natalia San Martin Fenollera. But it's a book about a man who assumes his dead sister's like 7 children or something like that. Yeah. And he's like a bachelor man with a big library, the man in the winged chair. And he has like a very weird way of homeschooling the children. Rather than like analyzing good art, like he's very big about art and literature and Latin and languages and things like that. But rather than analyzing the art, he takes the kids like all over the world, you know, to like Russia to sit in front of the great icon in its place there in front of it. And rather than analyzing or talking about it or talking about the history of the author, he just sits them in front of it. And like the woman who comes into the story, you know, is shocked that these children, this little like 5-year-old or whatever, could redraw this icon by hand. But it was because they just let it occur to them. And sometimes I think the performance of it, rather than like trying to strong arm and muscle and work through the text the first time in particular, is that you can let it happen to you. And then when you do read, like reading allows you to stop. Like you can't really stop a play. I mean, you can stop your audiobook, but it allows you to stop and like think about that sentence that you just read. Sometimes Jane Austen, I'm sorry, I love Jane Austen. Sometimes she is so ironic and clever that like I just like to read something and just like, think about the person that just one-upped the other person and they don't even get it.
Yeah, that approach that, you know, the analytical approach to literature, that we do tend to put that first. That comes a little bit out of our worldview as moderns. You know, our overly empirical, analytical sort of worldview. We treat that kind of knowledge, empirical, scientific kind of knowledge, as the only kind of knowledge. And it's not that it's not useful knowledge or a useful way of exploring, but it's not the only one. You know, you can't go about relationships that way. You know, you can't meet people and analyze the crap out of them.
It runs the danger of lacking humility.
Yeah, and so it's a useful kind of an approach to a book or to knowledge or to a person, but it has to come second to the experience of the thing, of the person, of the play. And I think that's, again, an important thing about giving yourself permission to just experience the thing first. Don't worry the first time you read a book about you know, catching every detail, you know, catching every reference, catching all the details of each scene or the scenery. No, just experience it. Just let yourself be pulled away in it. And then the second time or the third time, that's you can do a deeper read. You can read more closely. You know, it reminds me a little bit. We've talked before about quality versus quantity time in relationships. You know, we have this sense that, well, what we all need in our relationships is more quality time. You know, really good quality where we're all there. Carefree timelessness. It's really good, and that's obviously important. But sometimes we put such a high premium on that. We make such an ideal out of it that first of all, it never happens, or we're waiting around for it to happen, and we find it frustrating. When really what we need is just time with people, quantity time. We just need to be with people, and in the context of that being, in the context of that quantity, with our families, with our friends, then we find those moments for real quality time. Like it's the same thing with Scripture. It's the same thing with prayer. It's the same thing with good books. Sometimes you need the quantity. You need to just get through the book once or twice first. And then a great work of art will unfold for you in a different way. And again, to experience it in a few different ways, maybe to a quick skim first, and then maybe have it read to you, the great audiobooks that are out there. And then you'll find there's a whole lot more to it maybe than you thought the first time around.
Yeah, and I think we've been talking particularly about novels, but I'm thinking right now of a very different book. Cardinal Sarah's The Power of Silence. We have an upcoming episode on silence, so stay tuned. But this book is a spiritual read.
Yeah.
It's a lot like scripture in terms of like, I don't sit down and blow through like 3 books of scripture at the same time.
Give me the Cliff Notes, Cardinal, come on.
Like I noticed, this was the first book that I noticed that I needed to stop. Yeah. I needed to read a paragraph and just like, kind of like lift my head up and let that paragraph break on me and like let it like plunge the depths of my being. It sounds like a scary read, but it's not. It's incredibly readable, but it was not a book like I had read before. Yeah. Like you're just working through the plot or whatever. It was just like one that, I just had to take a step back and I'm on my second read now through this, and I think it is probably going to be a book like scripture that I'm reading for the rest of my life, like just continuously. Yeah.
It's interesting that so many parallels between this and like relationships. That's what keeps coming to mind. Again, if you approach your relationships too, analytically, or like we do this all the time with conversation, right? We get in a conversation with someone and we have an agenda. I want to get in here. I want to get done what I was here to do, to teach this person a lesson or to correct them where they were wrong, and I want to be done. And that's not, you can't build a relationship on that. There has to be a listening. There has to be an expectation that I'm going to discover something new here. I'm going to learn something new from this conversation. And that's what a book is. It's a conversation with that author about their fictional idea that they helped to midwife into existence from the muse, from God.
I love that.
Or it's, in a nonfiction, a spiritual work or a practical work. It's a conversation with them about a certain topic. And so there has to be the give and the take. And so again, the different types of reading and different reads and rereads, let those unfurl. Another aspect of this I was thinking is that the connection between repetition and culture, whether we're talking about culture in large or the culture of a family. We talk a lot about the family culture.
Culture of the Catholic Church.
Yeah.
It's all about repetition.
And if there's never... we live in an age with our media and our technology where we could, if we wanted to, if we allowed ourselves to, we could spend our whole lives experiencing a breadth of experience, but never encountering a depth of experience. We talked about this a little bit before on the coffee episode with Seth. Seth Payne joined us last year to talk about coffee. And we talked about that notion here that you could, if you wanted to, you could go through life constantly experiencing new things. But if you only did that, you'd experience one dimension of life, the x-axis, the horizontal aspect of life, the breadth. But there's another dimension. There's a depth in things.
Yeah, I remember first realizing this when our oldest was a toddler. Yeah. And we had started letting him watch TV for the first time because I had just had a second baby, and that was that. Yeah. And we started watching this one episode of Travel with Kids Rome. Like a 30-minute episode where these 2 little kids around his age went with their parents, around Rome. Yeah. Very exciting. And he got so, he just loved, he knew how the music was going to change after a while. He knew, what was coming next. He knew some of the words, Pantheon, things like that. And then we switched to Thomas the Train. I started to get guilty. I was like, is this going to warp him if we just continue to let him watch this one thing over and over again? And so he switched to Thomas the Train on Netflix, and it was one series, it was a TV series. And I noticed that for the first time, he would scream and cry when I turned the TV off because he knew what was, and he wouldn't be happy with the older
craving for that
episodes.
Novelty, like the auto feed, the auto scroll.
There was going to be more,
autoplay.
But before, it never occurred to him that there was more Travel with Kids. Mm-hmm. It was just that episode we go back to over and over again. The Winnie the Pooh movie is over.
He had this familiarity
it's
to
done.
it, and Yeah, it was interesting. There was a piece about affiliate, not that he should watch TV all the time, but if you're going to watch stuff, we just noticed that there was something different about finding something really good and beautiful and then returning to that over and over, and getting to know it better versus constantly getting into novelty.
Or just like viewing education as like amassing all the experiences.
Yeah, rather
just
than going
as
deep.
much as you can possibly throw into that brain.
Yeah.
Is fundamentally different than filling a mind with like good and truth and beauty and then allowing it to be bored and plunge deeper on its own.
Yeah.
And we see that in nature. Like when you go for nature walks, the changing of the season, you don't have to point out all those things to your kids or to yourself. You'll start to notice them. You'll start to get to know them. Nobody's out there analyzing them up and down with you.
They oughtn't to be.
They oughtn't. I know.
Stop it. I want to read a quote.
Okay.
That relates.
You're telling me to shut up.
No. The fictional person that was ruining our nature walk. I wanted to read this quote by Henry David Thoreau that connects to the breadth versus depth thing as well as the nature walk and all that. He writes, "I went to the woods because I wished to live deliberately, to front only the essential facts of life and see if I could not learn what it had to teach, and not, when I came to die, discover that I had not lived. I did not wish to live what was not life. Living is so dear. Nor did I wish to practice resignation unless it was quite necessary. I wanted to live deep and suck out all the marrow of life, to live so sturdily and Spartan-like as to rout all that was not life, to cut a broad swath and shave close, to drive life into a corner and reduce it to its lowest terms." So he was writing that because he did this sort of experiment. He went and lived out by this pond, But the whole point was he was simplifying, so there was less in his life, but he could go deeper into those things. And again, this topic of breadth versus depth, we apply to lots of things. We did it to coffee. Today, with the idea of rereading, we're kind of thinking of that in terms of books, that there are good books out there, and you need to give your permission to find them. So don't feel like you have to finish every single one. Find one that's worth rereading, and then go deep in it.
Yeah, and I encourage you to pick a book that you've read, reread it, and then reread it right away.
And then tell us which one it is so we can get
Yeah,
into it.
That's right. So we'll share just a couple. This is
the Reading Rainbow section.
This is what we fight about. This is what our marriage is like.
This is what
I said I'm going to share a couple, and he's going to tell me that a couple means two. When to me, a couple could mean like a handful.
A couple means two. Otherwise,
So our book, I've already mentioned like a lot of these.
Yes.
So Emma, Jane Austen's Emma, is one that I read and reread and love.
Yes.
What about you?
Oh, well,
we can alternate.
I'll just share a couple here. I mean, obviously.
Let's alternate.
Okay. Lord of the Rings, I have read. I kind of keep that on a repeat. Every year or two, I pick it back up and go through that trek with those familiar characters. And again, it is a great work of fiction, of literature. And so there is something new every time. There is a depth to the characters, to the themes. And so, yeah, it definitely bears rereading.
Yeah. So one I don't have here is Jennifer Fulwiler's One Beautiful Dream. Yeah. I think I've read that maybe like 6 times, and I think we've bought it maybe a dozen times and just like handed it out like candy at Halloween to people. What's another? Babe, you brought something.
C.S. Lewis's The Screwtape Letters.
That's right. We've done that as a group too. That's a great one
group
to read
study
aloud.
with people, yeah.
Yeah. Lark Rise to Candleford. Our producer, Alina De La Torre, put into our she's looking at me right now, our producer, put into our opening montage bees. Bees, because we love Lark Rise to Candleford. Bees, your master is dead. You must work for your missus now. Bees.
That one's going to go over great on the podcast. Joseph Pieper's The Four Cardinal Virtues. I constantly am talking about virtue on the show. It's because this book on the virtues,
we can't even handle.
I'm constantly going through it.
We can't handle all of our books. The Benedict Option.
Yeah, it's another
by Rod Dreher. That's one I know is going to be. We've reread it a couple times, but I know we're rereading it this 2021.
Yeah.
And I'd like to do an episode specifically on children's literature. So elevating children's literature. I've a guest in mind. But this is like our family's favorite. It's Jonathan Bean's This Is My Home, This Is My School. And you can tell there's duct tape and stuff and pages are falling out. And this is actually the second copy.
We only read it once and it fell apart.
So it got destroyed once before. And then the second copy that we got has gotten destroyed.
Yep.
Yeah.
So we want to hear yours. We want to hear your rereads. What are the books that are old friends for you, as we said before? We want to hear about them, and we like to talk about them. So
and so drop that in the comments below, but also please reach out to us, comment, join the app where you can talk with show creators. We really want to know what topics you would like to hear discussed and elevated. So please let us know for this 2020 what you are interested in.
Well, thanks again for joining us for Elevate Ordinary. Again, I'm JonMarc Grodi. This is Teresa. This show is about the ordinary aspects of our daily lives where there is romance and drama. If we can just dig a little deeper under the surface to see what God is calling us to and offering us through those little things. As I mentioned at the beginning, if you like what we're doing here, we invite you to join the Awaken Nation. Go to awakencatholic.org/donate. If you're passionate about this mission of sharing truth through beautiful media, we'd love to be partners with you, so check that out. And if you do, or if you don't, either way, if you're just along for the ride here, check out the app. Go to theawakenapp.io. We just launched a new app. You can get it from the Apple App Store or Google Play, that kind of stuff. It's a great growing community, a place to interact with the hosts and other members, other people who are passionate about these conversations and want to go a little bit deeper. So check out that. And again, we hope you'll join us next week for, again, this new season of Elevate Ordinary. Thanks again for being with us. God bless.
This show and all media on Awaken Catholic is made possible by the Awaken Nation and the Hallow app. The Awaken Nation is a community of people like you who support all things Awaken for as cheap as a cup of coffee a week and get access to exclusive content. Learn more by visiting awakencatholic.org/donate. Hallow is the only audio-guided Catholic prayer app focused on contemplative prayer and traditional Catholic meditation such as Lexio Divina, Daily Examen, and the Rosary. We here at Awaken all use Hallow every day and love it. To learn more or give it a try, visit hallow.app/awaken.